Yeah, so maybe let's just get started, Chris, and then we can catch anybody up we need to.
Okay, the only thing I was trying to do is get Pam. Unfortunately, forgot to put the link.
To the packet or to the
Oh
agenda?
no, she put the thing, but I'm so used to just going to the agenda and just hitting and having it link you to open onto Zoom, and she didn't.
Oh,
So I had to shut down. I'm trying to get to our other packet and everything. Okay,
yeah.
I have the packet. So our first thing is approve the agenda. Everybody good with the agenda?
I am good with the agenda, sure.
I have no problem with it.
Yeah,
Then, so we're good to go. And who's taking minutes tonight?
I do, I believe. That's the general. I'm willing to keep doing it. Let me put it that way.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I forgot. Do we have to actually say aye to everything, or are we good?
I think we call it a subcom and don't have to.
All right. Okay, so correspondence. So I don't know if again
So nobody really submitted this, right? You submitted this as just packet material, right?
Yeah. So all of the zoning map, because our subject is the scenic resources and ridgeline protection. So that's why I added that. And then I added the Queegee test and the so from Act 250, the legal standards for the undue and adverse. So it was just me. And that's why I wrote Clement submission, or remember we were saying that we wanted to identify who submitted what.
Yep, very good. That's I do like that. And interesting, I was just looking at the regulations today, and the regulations themselves use undue and adverse in the writing of the stuff in the bylaws, in the zoning bylaws. So it's good to have it in there because it's used in our regs.
Yeah. So anyway, so I thought when we were going through the number 4 that we would get to that. Okay, and now public comment for items not on the agenda. Craig, anything?
Well, I think I wanted to chat with you about what's on the agenda. So,
all right, let's see if Alec can come back on here. All right, I see a camera. There we go. I think we got Alec better. So yeah, so we jump smack down to number 4. That's pretty good. We're at the next to last agenda item within 5 minutes.
Can you come run my meeting?
Yeah.
It's you got to set up the agenda this way. Hi, Alec. You made it?
Great. Yeah. Hi. Sorry about that, everybody.
No problem. It's great.
No problem. All right, so we're basically down to the whole conversation of our meeting tonight is the scenic resources and the 2 maps. And I do want to tell you something that was really interesting. I talked to Pam, and I had asked her to put these both these maps in here, and we've always been identifying them as 2008 draft. She seems to think that somewhere in the files that there is a document or something that actually has them officially moved over to real documents, but she hasn't.
It takes the draft off.
It takes the draft off. And I said, was that just administrative oversight that the two maps that are on the town website just say draft? And she said she thinks that was the case. It was back in the Phil days. So yeah, it was her impression from what she remembered that when the zoning regulations were accepted as official in 2009, that she said that's when she thought that those maps were actually made official, but she doesn't. I'm not quite sure how how one goes about saying, you know, do you just remove draft? Because do you remember I said to Pam, I said the important thing is that the PUC rejected the maps because they said draft. And I thought that was an important administrative or a technical error for not. I still am having a bit of a dilemma with why, even though it was in ridgeline protection, it was still rejected. But I guess because Upper Loveland Road wasn't one of the
Right.
you had to have the two of them in combination. So anyway, I do recall that the PUC rejected the maps because they said draft. And that's, I think, brought a big, you know, red flag to me. But Pam
So
seems to
that's
think that
worth,
they,
so I mean, I can put that in the minutes to follow up on to say, okay, if Pam thinks there's a non-draft version, then clearly that should be the one that's referenced, that's available, you know, that
Oh,
people
definitely.
pull up. But yeah, I remember the PUC saying, or it was commentary, basically weakening the power of the map by saying it had draft on it. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So, so I guess I again, I don't know how officially you either remove it from an administrative standpoint, or somebody has to actually verify that if the zoning regs were adopted officially in 2009 and the maps are included,
Right,
does
right.
it make them all official?
Yeah, it might have been Ernie's got his hand up if you aren't.
Oh,
watching.
sorry, Ernie.
Oh, no, sorry. It was a while ago. I was just making sure that we're still on correspondence, not because of public comment. You know, you're saying the same things. The number 4 also says the same thing as number 2 about the ridge
Yeah.
lines and stuff. So I just wanted to make sure this is correspondence and we haven't skipped over public comment since we have.
Oh, no.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Alec, if Alec has public comment, we asked everybody else, but for items not on the agenda.
None for me. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sorry, Ernie. Yeah, we kind of jumped right to number 4, which is all related to the whole correspondence thing.
Right,
but-
right. I caught that. That was why I'm bringing it up, so that anyone who has anything to say, but now that that's taken care of, now we can continue. Sorry.
So let
Okay.
me, I'll take it as a note. I think the statement is, did the map bundled with the regs go from draft to approved status back in 2009? And that just has to be either was reflected and those aren't the ones we're looking at, or, you know, just answer that question with Pam or anybody else that we can answer it with. I'll just note that.
Yeah, and I think it would be important to actually have the maps on the website, right? I would assume it would be adopted 2009, and so
Yeah.
that it would be considered official.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Just to maybe
Ernie?
get the. Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
Ernie. Yep.
I was just gonna say, I would think that if the maps were part of, and they would have been part of, if they were accepted part of the regulations, then they would have been adopted automatically as part of the regulations. And you know, these might be holdovers or leftovers, not in that. Although I don't recall seeing anything like this in the regulations either. So
Oh,
they
good
may
point.
not have been adopted. It's hard for me to say, because you would need an official copy of the regulations. And I long ago, you know, while I was on the DRB, lost my copy of the regulations because they, you know, fell apart.
The maps are referenced in the bylaws. I mean, certainly.
Yes.
They're
yes.
referenced, but they're only, you're right, Ernie, the actual maps are only in the town plan. But they are referenced in the
How are they referenced though? That would be, you'd have to
the
actually.
maps.
It's in the table of contents, and then they're referred to in the body of it, where it'll say scenic as shown.
And
on map C or
I would
whatever.
treat them as approved then. That's a really bad way of doing stuff, though. They should be actually included in the actual bylaws too. I mean, that just makes no sense. why they weren't. I think that just makes
Yeah.
things complicated for people.
Yeah.
Uh,
And-
part- because it used to be that the DRB was handed all the regulations and subdivision regulations, and you had this book that was like 3 or 4 inches thick that you carried to every meeting, and these maps would have been necessary to be in there so that you'd have a clue, but they weren't.
Craig has his hand up.
Yeah, I was just looking at a copy of the July 1st, 2009 zoning regulations. And as you said, the overlay district maps are listed in the table of contents and the body, but in this one I was looking at, they're also listed at the end as being in the appendix itself. And then I scroll further and the appendix isn't there. So I don't know what to make of that, but it's also listed as being with those zoning regs.
Yeah.
But then my appendix isn't there.
Well, I know on the website, the appendices of the town plan are like a separate link on the website. So I don't know if that's true with the zoning regs, but
that's what happens. No, so then they link you to the maps that are what we're looking at that say draft.
Okay,
You do
so
actually
let's
use
just
that
take that. Let's take that as an action item to clean up, figure it out, and then
Yep.
put it on
Right.
the list if something needs to be done. I just maybe to kick off the body of the conversation, I talked with Peter Gregory at Two Rivers to try and get, that was one assignment I took, to see what other towns are doing relative to scenic and ridge lines and solar sighting. And the short answer is almost nothing. There are 2 towns, Pomfret and Woodstock, that have any mention of ridgeline, and that's something Peter said they did decades ago. Scenic, as he described it, many towns have talked about it. None of them have written up anything specific for fear of litigation or just, as soon as you get more specific, it gets more difficult. So that's just something to have in mind, that it's not like everybody around us is. That's the one other thing to the everyone around us does something. The enhanced energy plan question, everyone around us does have that. Stratford, Thetford, Hartford, all have approved enhanced energy plans. So that's a little bit of an aside, but in terms of scenic and ridgeline, nobody other than decades ago, those 2 towns has bitten that off and been able to really codify something.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Ernie.
We in the DRB, we were actually enforcing the ridgeline, the scenic, the ridgeline overlay district, pretty regularly. We didn't get any legal blowback about doing that. I think it has. I think over the years, I'm not sure if DRB is still enforcing it, but as the town has become more popular with people willing to spend ridiculous amounts of money on property, the difficulties of building on the ridge lines have been minimized, and so now it's harder to enforce that because people just think, well, nah, I want to have my house on a ridge line. And we may start seeing some blowback because of that. But in the past, we didn't have it. People just, thought that it was a good idea not to have houses built on the ridgeline. There is also some environmental reasons for not having houses built on ridgelines, energy reasons why you don't build a house on a ridgeline, because basically now your house is exposed, wind, all those other things that make the house more expensive to run, and waste fuel, and all the climate change issues that we all are familiar with. And so ridgeline protection provides other things besides just keeping the town pretty. It also includes wildlife habitat too. There's a whole pile of things that are not just aesthetic Matter of fact, more things that are not aesthetic about it than anything.
Mm.
And I think, you know, and you know, all of this, of course, does play into this, solar sighting subcommittee's mission too. So,
Right. Yeah, and that's what I was going to throw on the table, and Alec has his hand up. But yeah, we want to focus on the solar sighting aspects of this for the sake of the subcommittee, and that when you go through in 2009, nobody was talking. The word PV does not show up in the bylaws, right? So that wasn't what was. It's not called out at all. So the word like development does putting 50 kilowatts of solar panels count as development. It's not there's nothing in the development definition that says anything about solar siting. So I think that's our unique charter for tonight and for this committee, is to put ridgeline, scenic, and PV. We're not really talking windmills, but solar site all together and look at them.
Alec?
I just so I'm the newest member of the DRB, so I have like very little experience with a lot of this, but I can say that my first DRB meeting was a couple weeks ago, and we did have an application involving the Ridgeline regulations, and we went through all the criteria that were listed in the regs, and our decision was written according to that, and it definitely seems to be enforced still, and part of our mission.
So how can I just ask you real quick, how, when you looked at the ridge line, because it's a two-step process, you have the ridge line and then you also have the scenic road sort of working in concert with each other. So was it enforced, or what was the result of the decision?
So on my memory, it was just the ridge line. Let me pull up, if you give me 1 second, I can pull up our decision and see if we mentioned if the scenic road played into it. Let me see. Ridgeline. It was just the ridgeline. I don't know why any scenic regulations didn't come into play, but I'm not sure if they would have applied to that particular piece of property.
Yeah, there are different overlays, but the interesting
it is
thing, go ahead.
That just this piece of property actually was like cut in half by the ridgeline protection, right? So it was right on the cusp of it anyway.
What I was going to say is just the interesting thing is that ridgeline is the thing you're looking at. Scenic is the place you're looking from. The roads that are marked scenic are the viewpoint, and the ridgeline is what you're looking at. So it's an interesting little difference there.
Craig?
Yeah, I'd like to ask the question that I asked back in 2008 and 2009. Does a ridgeline protection necessarily need to be entirely tied to a scenic overlay?
Great
question. It was to a large extent interpreted only that way. And to follow up on the list that Ernie was giving, the amount of erosion that happens into a watershed and streams from ridgeline development is higher. The inaccessibility of emergency vehicles is higher. And when it comes to wildlife, the core forest blocks in town that are mapped and that the state had us put in the most recent town plan because they deem them important are all around a center of a ridgeline. That's just the way the development of our valleys has happened. And so the most core part of our forest blocks are ridgelines. And those are very important for wildlife movements. They're very important for climate change resilience for wildlife. Those habitats that exist at lower valley elevations will be at these higher ridgeline elevations as time progresses. And I think the last thing I would add to that as follow-up is, I would say absolutely a photovoltaic development is a big development. It has really huge effects on the landscape.
Well, I think also, when it comes to the ridgeline and so on, they may actually, we may see, we're going to see an overlap between forest block designations and the ridgelines, because the legislature demands that forest blocks be protected, and the ridgelines will just enlarge, because, as you said, you look at the way the mapping is, that map is, there's kind of this, skinny balloon looking shapes, but the thing is that's going to widen right out, almost going right to every, especially like in the western part of Norwich and sort of on the periphery, the periphery of, on three sides at least, you'll start seeing forest blocks starting to show up and fill those out, and those are protected by law, so by statute. So that's this map actually has to change.
So I want to ask Ernie, I want to ask Ernie and Alec, because Alec, you being on the DRB, and Ernie, your experience on both Planning Commission and DRB. Can you answer Craig's question? Is there, Craig, I think you just, no, or I'm sorry, Alec, you just brought up a situation where you had a DRB setting where you didn't consider the scenic part of that. The scenic resources, even though I should have reread the reg, because I thought,
I looked at the regs
can't-
today, and if you look at what you're supposed to think about when you're reviewing a ridgeline, a development in the ridgeline protection district, the things it describes are visual, I guess is the point. And so to that degree, they're scenic, they're visual, and then it emphasizes what you can see from a public road and what you can see from a scenic road would be their sort of more important. But it's visual criteria, that when you talk about that, what's in the regs.
I'll be honest, when I was on the DRB, I never understood why we had to, in my mind, the two things were actually completely separate, because because of all those concerns about the ridge lines, which are separate from the aesthetics, of the scenery. So basically, from my point of view, ridge lines were just, they were there, you had to protect them, and that's, somebody wanted to do otherwise, they really couldn't. And there was even an early test of all of this was Stan Teeter's property, because he had a piece of property that went right up to a ridge line, and his house burned. He did build a new house, and for a while he didn't really argue too heavily, but he kind of had wanted to put it up near the ridge line, and in the end he had to put it right on the edge of, he had to bring it down from the ridge line, that protected area, and he was allowed to build his house somewhere just off of it. But he was on the DRB already, and kind of sort of knew where it was, and so he wasn't. I think we won't have to worry about that as much in the future, because of like I said, the other things that the ridgeline protection protects as well.
Craig, go ahead, because I know you've got to probably go.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go to my meeting, so I'll leave you with, even if you're stuck with the visual criterion, it's absolutely very visual to see a contiguous forest no longer be contiguous. To see a forest block broken up. It's also very visual to see a wildlife corridor. There's lots of visual evidence of that. So I'll leave you with that. I have to go to my meeting.
All right.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you, Craig. So I have a very interesting, oh, sorry, Jan. I have a very interesting.
I was gonna summarize those points, because I think I'm trying to keep track of the the things that we'll need to address, but it relate, what's the definition of development? And that has to include PV, and it doesn't right now.
But we should,
yeah.
I'm before you write these down, I've got this is kind of a very interesting thing. Based on everything you guys just said, and what Alec just told us, is that the criteria that they looked at was just for ridgeline. They didn't include scenic road, scenic views, right? Well, Rod let the preferred site for Upper Loveland pass through because he used the criteria that Upper Loveland Road wasn't one of the scenic roads listed. So he made both of those, and that was an absolute. So if suddenly we come out and say, oh, by the way, the criteria is only for the view, then I think there's going to be a bit of a problem there.
I think the word absolute is the one that matters, because I think the visuals from anywhere to a ridgeline are talked about in the ridgeline, or a town road, certainly. And in the regs, it talks about a public highway. And it's almost as if having that public highway be one of the designated scenic ones adds weight, makes it more important. But it's not absolute. It's not that ridgelines by themselves, as seen from public places, matter. And then if the public place you're looking from is on the scenic map, then it's extra important.
Okay, that's funny, because I distinctly remember Rod's letter to the PUC. In one of his, I guess, and technically in his brief, was Upper Loveland wasn't considered one of the roads, therefore it didn't apply. The ridgeline protection didn't apply. Go ahead, Alec.
So I'm like comparing the ridgeline and the scenic resources map with this the application that came up in my last meeting, and I think it's sort of illustrative of this. So the property was at the end of Meeting House Road, which is off of New Boston, up by where Ladeau meets it.
Yeah.
And the ridgeline protection area travels between like Bradley Hill and New Boston along the ridge. But the scenic resources area is just Bradley Hill Road. And so this property was in the ridgeline because it's up on the ridge, but not in the scenic resources because Meeting House Road and New Boston are not scenic resources roads. So it was only a ridgeline protection issue in that DRB application. And it's like really close.
Yeah.
But
it is. I think this is a crux that we're going to have to get at this issue, which is the seen from where issue.
Yeah.
Scenic ridgelines and so forth. Because there's a limit to what somebody can do if they're completely invisible. Like the Hennessy solar application was visible from a property line where the topography was, no other house could see it, no public road could see it, and that made a difference to what they could do or what would be looked at. And I've been on that Meeting House Hill property actually, and but that's the point. Even if New Boston was a scenic road, the property is not going to be in both the scenic and the ridgeline, because it's sort of one or the other. You're looking from one to the other. So we're going to have to think through how to define that, and how to say, oh, okay, it meant clearly the hands down winner for scenic resource, which is a little different than scenic view, but not quite, is the Van Orman's farm as you come down Union Village, right? And so that has scenic limitation. If somebody wanted to put up 10 units of housing in that field there, they would get hammered on scenic, not ridgeline. But it's because it is viewed as a pretty picture from a main road. So somehow we have to pry this apart, because to Ernie's point, the ridge line, to really protect what matters about the ridge lines, you should be talking about more dimensions than just the visual. Whether it's forest blocks or erosion or wildlife and so forth. There are more dimensions to why ridge lines are important. But the scenic and visual overlap in these things. We have to think about that and pry it apart.
Ernie.
I just want to put a word of caution too on the ridge lines and so on. The last iteration of the Planning Commission received a report from, I can't remember what they're called, but they were they drafted a paper making recommendations of how we should change our regulations. And one of the recommendations they made was, first of all, we had to make the town more amenable to development. And in particular, one of the things they recommended was removing restrictions from ridgeline development, because that was where the people want to put high-priced developments because of the views that ridgelines afford anything placed on them. And that report, to the best of my knowledge, was never actually formally rejected.
Sorry, Ernie, can you tell me again where that report was from?
All I can remember is it's from a corporation in Plattsburgh. They were recommending a lot of making the town much more amenable to development. And one of the things that caught my eye was the idea of they were saying, and I just said that people who want the higher priced locations are ones that are on the steep slopes and the higher and the ridge lines, because they afford them a better distant view, and they're willing to pay for that. I think that another thing we also have to keep in mind related to ridge lines is there was for a long time, but it was when somebody had problems with a slope with they couldn't develop their land because of the slopes. They watered down the slope protection in the town, in the regulations. But slope protection is also related to ridgeline protection and forest block and erosion and this, that, and the other thing. In fact, the slope protection had a lot to do with erosion and had it and so on, more than anything else, and also accessibility for fire trucks and this, that, and the other thing. There are all kinds of practical, almost resilience related issues when it came to the erosion, to the slopes issue. So, and that's related also to this. And there is a map for slopes too, somewhere. I think that you'd find something related
there is
in that appendix that you were talking about.
Yeah, I saw. Or just
At
to
what point
reference.
is somebody? Sorry.
Go ahead.
At what point? Go back to that document. What year? Who was Rod there or Phil? Who was involved in getting information like that? And how did they respond?
in watering down the slope regulations? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, you were just saying ridgeline in general. You were just saying something from Plattsburgh, the document that you.
That came on. That was last. I think it was either given to us in the end of 2022 or the beginning of 2023. No, yeah, it was in 2022 when we first got it. I think. I have a copy of it. I'm sure.
Recently, but what was the why were you supposed to get it or listen to it? I mean, what was this credibility?
It was part of of what we were doing to begin starting to change the
Okay.
zoning and land use regulations and subdivision regulations.
That doesn't explain, Ernie. Why would a company out of Plattsburgh have interest in, is this a legal
were hired.
firm?
They were hired.
what?
We paid money for that report.
Oh, okay, that's right. So you guys, so Rod hired somebody
Mhm.
to look
At the
over,
behest of the former way that at the behest of the planning commission.
Hmm.
and they were suggesting that. I just want to let's recap this. Rod submits, or you guys wanted to do this, or Rod wanted to do it?
Well,
We don't, I
That's
mean,
a matter
either
of
way,
fact.
it was officially done
yes,
to hire
Okay.
a consulting firm to look at the regs and make suggestions.
and the town, the select board approved, I think it was 50,000, but it might have been more, $1,000 for the report.
And the report basically said, okay, well, let me ask you this. What happened after you received the report? Did you change any regulations, or were you concerned?
No,
or
we never, we were supposed to be changing the regulations, but the planning commission, the personnel and the planning commission changed.
And we haven't changed the regs since 2009. So whatever input has come in since then has not moved the needle yet.
Correct.
And was there anything in particular, since we already have ridgeline protection and the scenic resources already available, then were you guys making a drastic change, or were they just saying loosen everything up? I just want to see this document. It's really interesting.
Well, that's what I was going to. We should circulate it certainly.
Yeah, exactly. I'm bringing it up because you should be aware of it, because it is still out there, and there are still proponents of it out there.
So what I'm going to do, and this relates to the PC discussion around documents and website, and I talked to Lily and Pam, and this will work fine. We will have a place on the website where we can put any of these documents are already public documents. We don't have to run them through a packet or anything. We just want to move them so they're easier to find. And either Lily or Pam can add links and adjust things on the website anytime we want. So Ernie says, this document is the one we were talking about. I'm going to set up a structure, send it to Pam that says, all right, here are kind of the headings we want. And one of them will be input into zoning edits, 2018 to the present or whatever. And there'll be a number of documents and then we might have a subfolder of that is, draft changes to the bylaws. But that's the place to get things like this, because then Ernie can say, oh yeah, it's that one. It's linked right there, and we can all go look at it.
I think on top of if I can find it, I can send a copy. I'll send you a copy on just so you can, and Chris, just so you
I'll use it just to reference, because I'll send it to Pam and she'll put it as a link.
Right.
Or put it in the packet for the planning commission. Alec, can I ask you a question? When you were saying that you guys were looking at the Meeting House Road, I'm guessing that you guys actually have a list that you are looking at of all the scenic roads. So, what are you guys looking at as a document?
So the packet that came to us had the ridgeline map with this property sort of like highlighted on it. I think that was the application though. The two maps that I was looking at were the ridgeline map that came with the application, which is the same that's on the website. And I was just looking at the scenic resources map on the planning and zoning website as well.
Okay, so there wasn't something like
there was a recent application that was over by Jericho area where it wasn't in a ridgeline, but it was a mapped scenic. And again, the application had a blow up of the map saying this is in the scenic area. It's in the hash marked part of that map. So I think that it's a question in the application that says, if you're on one of these maps, you got to show it on your application.
So going back to that as a simple to do, yeah, and I keep thinking, and I think I just came up with a word, the simple, a to-do list, and a list of to-dos.
Yeah.
Like just said, see if we should change those maps to say adopted in 2009 as opposed to draft.
Yeah.
But another to-do list is, I would really like to see those maps with road names on it. And I don't know if you can get that through. It seems so arbitrary for us to look at those maps or the label. I don't mean, the average resident in town who has to apply for a zoning permit or something, and they'll see their house, whatever. But it just seems to me that those maps are available from the listers on the GS or the GIS maps, or the maps, the E911 maps. So it seems to me that there should be able to be an overlay of both of those maps that have the names of the roads on them, because it seems so arbitrary to sort of, I don't know what the green. I just think of those green marks as being so ridiculous.
Well, I know. Here's a good example. Our daughter is doing a little accessory building, but she needed a building permit, and she came to me and said, I can't tell what district we're in, and I can't tell whether we're in the ridgeline. And so I looked and I said, you're in rural residential, and no, you're not in the ridgeline. But because I know what the roads look like, and that little squiggle is this one, and that little one that's shaped. If you're not used to, that's what Kyle's for. You have to go to Kyle or the zoning administrator and ask them, because most people aren't used to staring at the maps of Norwich.
Yeah, I think those they just look like green blobs, and I'm not quite sure if it's actually not even in concentric rings. It doesn't seem like there's like what Ernie was talking about with the slopes. I mean, if I would think that they would have had the topo as in like really serious slope would be in dark green, and then the concentric rings would kind of go as it went out and say, okay,
there is to Ernie's point, there is a steep slopes map, and I saw that in actually one of these. It was a map file that's in the town plan preparatory material, but it just analyzes the GIS, the topo, and says when the contour lines are that close together, color it this color. So that's the slope map. The ridgeline definition is simply 300 feet from the single line at the top of the ridge. It's not contour, it is distance from. That's why it looks so uniform.
Oh,
it is a straight line with 300 feet measured around it.
The planning reg says 750 feet, except for land within 300 feet of a class 1 through 3
got
road.
the 300 feet. Yeah, that one's interesting too. So it's 750. But
the scenic resource cannot be part of the ridge, because it's the ridge line protection area has to be 300 feet away from a road. I guess it
says
except,
but yeah, it says except, yeah.
That's what came up with Upper Loveland.
Mm-hmm.
That was the development envelope. Couldn't get within a certain footage of the back of their house.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the E911 maps are fabulous, and if you blow them up, when the Affordable Housing Committee came before us and was, I know they're coming again with the grant for some of the units.
Yeah.
And I knew that the tower was there and there was a fall zone. And that E911 map was perfect because you can do topos, you can do elevations, you can do all kinds of things, but you can do this concentric ring of for the tower and draw that fall zone. So it's really, I'm just wondering if, I'm not sure who you were just saying can actually create these maps for us. Do they base it off of something like E911 or what do they base it off of? I mean, we could do a lot with that E911 map.
I mean, it's all GIS. If anybody who's doing mapping will be using GIS base and then doing overlays on top of it. But the definition of the ridgeline protection district is based on the line at the top and a distance, not a contour. Then the steep slopes one, which says in the regs 25%. If it's over 25%, then you can't use it for anything but conduit lines, and but the map for steep slopes uses contour lines. But
I'd love to see a big wall map with everything so easy to look at rather than that kind of silly thing we've got.
Well, if it's any consolation to you, the way they used to be done when they were more manual, I was, doing the inventories and stuff years and years and years and years and years ago, is they were all on clear Mylars. So you would lay them, like the old textbooks where they would have, the inside.
Point them up.
Yeah. And they on top of each. So you'd see.
Well, that's why it says floodplain overlay map.
Right, exactly.
Word overlay comes from the Maya.
Funny.
So that's how it is done. It is kind of done the way you think.
So going back to sort of the DRB. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's why the weighting is interesting, because if you take, it's a forest block, it's a ridge line, and it's in view from a scenic. By the time you layer all those on top, you really shouldn't be doing anything there. That's kind of the way it's supposed to work. It's a weighting function. It's not absolute, but if enough things stack against you, then the DRB in their infinite wisdom should say, no, you can't do that there.
But that's where our regulations need to be changed, is to make it easy for the DRB to be able to do that, because what we got now are a hodgepodge of regulations, not to talk about, not even discussing the ambiguities and contradictions and all the other loopholes and things that are built into them. We have to make this so that there's a way that when there is something that we haven't thought about, at least the DRB can figure it out, sort of like doing case law. They can sort of figure it out until we get around to redoing, rewriting a piece of legislation again.
So going back to my question to Alec, so do you find that if you were to narrow the focus for scenic resources or with Ridgeline, is there anything that you can see that needs to be tightened up, or that you would do? Is there something that you find that you guys are frustrated, or was there?
I don't have the breadth of experience to give like general answers about the DRBs, over the course of years, how it's dealt with different issues that come up. I will say it wasn't particularly difficult to deal with this one application with the ridgeline. I mean, the factors are pretty clear. The application spoke to it pretty clearly. And our conditions on the approval mirrored those, the one off the top of my head is like, you have, like, if you exterior lighting has to be shielded and pointed downwards. Okay. And that's in there. You know what I mean? I thought that those criteria were pretty manageable for us. We went through them, and the decision reflected that.
Okay.
And I will say that when I volunteered to come to this meeting, I asked anyone for to tell me if there's anything that needed urgent attention on it. I didn't hear anything, so I'm not sure there's been any consternation in DRB recently about the Ridgeline or the scenic resources
Okay.
Rulings. Yeah.
Okay.
So the
Well, I
question.
mean, again, just
Go ahead.
we're trying to apply it to solar siting, but at the same
That's
time, no
what-
matter
yeah.
what, if you can't separate the two of them out. I mean,
Right.
I'm not quite
Yeah.
sure when, Jan, when you're talking about adding the word PV, I'm not quite sure if that's legal or not to say, can you have a whole separate subsection that applies to just PV as opposed to development? I'm not quite
Well,
sure.
yeah, I mean, I think we're the ones that have to think through that and decide how we want to answer that, because I think just picture the application that Alex talking about right now, and picture if they had even a 15 kW solar panel set up, 15 kW below that, and you don't have to worry about a whole bunch of solar siting state stuff. But say they couldn't put it on the house. The house was facing the wrong way, but they wanted 15 kW of solar, and they were going to put it in the front lawn of the house. There's no specific guidance for the DRB to say, okay, we're going through the checklist and we're deciding what to tell them to do. And if it said, we're going to put what is, 30 or 40 panels on ground mounts, the ones that you see on trackers, what are those? 3,000 or 4,000. So you could have 4 or 5 of those and stay under that limit. And there is nothing in the definition of development or in the guidance that the DRB has to work with to tell them what to do with those PVs.
I know they
from
can't.
the
Though.
DRB,
The DRB can't do anything about it. Wouldn't it go right before the PUC, no matter what?
I don't know about the sub 15 kW stuff. We are not allowed to make zoning regs that preclude medium to large solar. Like, you can't just outlaw it. But I don't know about the smaller ones, and you could get a pretty big visual impact from a 15 kilowatt set of panels. But that's a good question.
I will say from the DRB perspective, I noticed in the zoning regulations from 2009, there's the Article 4 has specific use options. And, small wind energy systems is one of them. I feel like from an application point of view, from the DRB's point of view, and I hesitate to say this because I don't have, again, my experience is limited, but to the extent this subcommittee wanted to write solar specific regulations, I think making a separate subsection in the specific use section makes sense, because it makes sense to the DRB because it's cleaner. And of course you would have to write it in there, if it's in a scenic resource or if it's in a ridgeline, those also apply. But if you want to write specific regulations for solar, it's easy to apply. If it's just a section, it would be 4.16 solar development. That's easy for the DRB to apply. And I feel like, small d democratically, like, it's easy for the townspeople to know what gets done. You know what I mean? We are adopting a new provision of the town plan specifically about solar. It says this, it's at 4.16, it's all contained right here. Really clean, really neat and clean.
Mhm.
And I feel, just reading the regs, that sort of stuck out to me as like, well, that seems like the place that this would go if you would put it there.
Right. And I think it's a very good idea, and it's a very good point. And that the point is that in 2009, people were worried about or cared about small d democratic helping to decide what to do with windmills. And nobody's putting up windmills now because the technology has gotten to where PVs are the thing that needs to be talked about and decided on and written about. So I think it is a perfectly sensible place to put it.
And this is
And then-
everything under 15.
Well, so I have a to-do that I just marked down, which is we need to understand what we can do based on state regs in terms of zoning regs, because I know there are limits, on the 500 kWs or the 150 kWs. You can't preclude them, just like you can't preclude duplexes or ADUs because the state doesn't, or trailer parks. We are not allowed to say you can't have a trailer park. That is, the state says it. So the state is trying to encourage renewable energy. They do not want you to preclude that. But what are the bounds of what we can and can't do? We need to understand that. And
It's preferred sites. So if I'm pretty sure the cutoff is at either 15 or 50. I'm not, without looking at it.
15 is
15 does not require a preferred site, but they still have to go before the PUC. No matter what solar, whether you're putting it on your house or you're putting it in your backyard, you still have to submit a 248 to the PUC.
You have to
you
get a
don't need the
certificate of public good.
Right. It's right.
And to
So-
get one of those, yeah, I've done those. To get one of those for a roof mounted system under 15 kW is basically a
Right.
rubber stamp. Those are really easy. As soon as it's ground mounted, it perks people up a little bit. If it's ground mounted anywhere near a wetland, it really perks them up. But it doesn't have hurdles if it's 15,000 and under. 15 to 50 is one thing.
Right.
That's why Hennessy was 50 and not 60, because it mattered. 50 is another cutoff, then 150 is a cutoff, and then 500 is a cutoff. And the rules change in each of those blocks. But so we need to understand those rules. We need to have a one-pager that says, here's what the state versus town responsibilities, allowances, whatever are for these different size solar projects. Because I don't know.
So we do though. It's under the definition under preferred site. So
We have it in our plan. We have a statement.
no. That's straight out of the state in the PUC. So the PUC basically says under definitions under 5.10C or 5.0100C.
Yeah.
The one that they're actually looking to do proposal changes.
Yeah.
If you look under definitions under preferred site, the definition of preferred site, and it tells you exactly what kilowatt necessitates town approval through a preferred site letter.
Right.
Now, if we don't have this, again, the town of Norwich has our blanket preferred site, whatever. So, except in ridge lines and scenic views, whatever. But this is going to draw me back to the Queechy test. So then they also say anything below a certain kilowatt has nothing to do with the town. You don't have to go before the town. You still have to get your certificate of public good. So they already have defined what a town can look at and discuss either, again, if we didn't have a blanket preferred site status, then there would be much more oversight at the planning commission and select board level. And that's why we're in this discussion in the first place. So this brings me back to the Queechy test and the undue and adverse, because we were talking about Meeting House Road and the ridge line, and going back to the Queechy test, they have made it perfectly clear to us that you can't just have this amorphous map, green map. They want us to start identifying a specific, like, New Boston Road Ridge, be much more defined. And that's where I think, I don't know, you guys, Alex, I don't think you guys have to go through anything like the Queechy test, but clearly because
Because
it's not
we're just
solar.
we're just applying the regs, and if someone
Yeah.
sues us,
Exactly.
Yeah,
then
I do,
we're
I
out.
want to, I want to take, and I took a note because I think there is a specific question to what you just said, Chris, which is the statement that from a solar siting point of view, at 15 kilowatts or below, the town isn't involved. That it's just certificate of public good. But my question is there a scenic, is there any scenic hook at all? Because if somebody wanted to put, whoever's the sort of the closest house to town in the historic district or some, and they wanted to put 3 or 4 of those trackers on their front lawn, does the town have any hooks into that? Not even because it's PV, but solar. Like if somebody wanted to stick an art installation that was 4 blank PV arrays, how much oomph does the town have from a scenic point of view? Say, wait, you just ruined our view.
The only thing that I have seen, and it was in that scenic, that from
The
2000.
resource, yeah, the resources inventory.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting case. I wasn't involved at the time. Ernie, you might have been on the planning commission or the DRB, and I forgot her. It was Sue Lupien's old house. The woman who lives there now wanted to put the tracker
Yep.
right in front of that cemetery.
Yep.
To my knowledge, that was very controversial at the time, and I'm not quite sure if that went before anybody, if there was, but I just remember, like I said, I was not involved in it at all, but I heard it was controversy because it was close to the cemetery. Now, I don't know, again, if that falls under the DRB jurisdiction, or, was there anything, was it just a public, kind of like the public got involved because, there was a pros and cons on the listserv, or was there actual something that was going on with the DRB? So there's your example of a single tracker.
Yep.
And it's interesting that 2000 resource list specifically mentions not affecting any of the cemeteries in the area. So I know that cemetery, there was definitely some voices about keeping
I
it as
know.
far away from
We
the
walk there almost every day. That's at the end of our road. And
You're kidding.
and there were definitely, we walk up that way. That's how we, that's half a mile from our house. And so, and there were definitely people, and us included, that said, wait a minute, that's just smack dab in front of a historic scenic cemetery. But I think it's a very good question just as an example. And I think it's a good thing that we should have like 4 or 5 examples that help us parse this out. So the Meeting House Hill one is good. It's on the ridge line, but it's not visible from this scenic, but it is from that one. Obviously, Upper Loveland gives us some examples. But that single tracker in front of what was identified as a scenic resource in the inventory, those cemeteries, is another good example. What regs applied to it? How was the decision reached? Or was it private property, small thing, you couldn't do anything about it? I don't know, but I think it'd be very useful to find out.
Yeah, no, that's why I brought it up, because I just happened to remember that this, obviously it was her property, and that was the best location for the tracker, but it all came back to the cemetery being the bone of contention in I remember. So it goes back to the rights of private property, and again, this goes back to the question: is that a DRB? You were just saying, Alex, that you put it under 4.2 whatever section, is that something, Ernie, you're, come on, get your legal brain flowing.
Right now, I'm just listening. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of important points that I hadn't thought about before, so keep talking.
No, I mean, was when that tracker went up, I'm assuming it did not go before the planning commission for approval.
And I don't recall it coming in front of the DRB.
Does it, I mean, we should just, it would be, did it need a building permit? I mean, it's.
Oh, yeah,
it's
yeah,
pretty
yeah, yeah.
easy. Is it a permitted use? Is it a permitted use without even needing the, like a default permitted use? You don't even need to get the zoning administrator to look at it. So there's, an accessory building less than 100 square feet in a rural residential, you don't have to talk to anybody, you just build it. And so by the definitions of our regs, how does PV fit into that?
I think in those days, when that was built, I absolutely do not, unless I missed a meeting, which was pretty rare. That never came in front of the DRB. We never visited that site. We never, I recall nothing about permitting it. And so I'm taking a guess that, it was considered, it's relatively small physically. So I'm taking a guess that somehow it was permitted.
At great
that's why I'm
personal risk, I will say that I did not go before the DRB to get my tracker put in at my house last year.
And I
think
think
you
if you would think you had asked, I mean, like, I certainly didn't put them on the barn roof.
And now that you mention that,
if you looked at the definitions of what do you need a building permit for, I think you could easily justify the fact that you don't need to.
Yeah,
No.
it's definitely less than 100 feet.
And now that you mentioned that, my next door neighbors here have put up a solar panel while I was still on the DRB, and I don't recall ever seeing. I mean, it just one day wasn't there, and the next day the post is there, and the next day the whole thing is up. I remember, I don't recall that either, and that not remembering one. Yeah, I might, but we never had anything to do with
No, and I used to, reputable local company. They would have done it if it was necessary, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, Bill
Right.
definitely sensitive to all that kind of stuff.
If you,
But it
if
goes
you
back to
told
your,
them-
it goes back to what we were just saying, though, is anything below 15. If it was, so we were going back to a DRB question. So as far as solar siting, if that meeting house built, if that, what you guys were looking at for Meeting House Road, and they wanted to put, well, again, I don't know enough about trackers to know if that would be, if 3 trackers would be less than 15, and that would be
it would, it still would.
a preferred.
3 would be less.
Okay, so
Okay.
that would necessitate a preferred site. Okay, so then, so 3 trackers, and let's just say it's in the, say that they're moving it up the ridge line and it's in the ridge line. Alex, is that what you're talking about, to have that little extra, now you've got, I'm just trying to clarify what you're suggesting, is that
Yeah, so
on a smaller scale,
if the Meeting House Road application had been, instead of there was like a garage with a apartment on it, if it had been for solar, if solar, I mean, I'm trying to imagine like a structure with solar that would have needed a permit. We would have gone through, we would have just had to apply the normal ridgeline criteria to that. So forest cover. Okay, well, it's like it's surrounded by forest. Well, if it's surrounded by forest, it's probably not going to work that great. So they're probably not going to put it there. So that first one would probably prevent it normally, right? Placement of structure, woodland screen, landscaping and screening, glare. I think we would just have to capacity for plant, community services, facilities, character of the area, we would have just had to like apply these general criteria to the solar. But if there was a
Yeah,
a solar rule in
criteria.
section 4, then we could sort of skip all that and go like, okay, solar and ridgeline, apply those or don't, or whatever this committee were to come up with, we could do something specific to that.
yeah. It is a good, I like that. It's a good example. If you just took that example and said, you put roof mounted solar on that garage, pretty much trivial. We know that. You put 3 trackers as part of the project. And okay, yeah, you have these derivative criteria, like you probably will clear more trees if you're going to have 3 trackers away from the house. You're going to have glare, maybe, so but those are secondary. Those don't primarily get to, and this is really the crux of the topic. Do you think looking at solar trackers is a scenic problem or a scenic benefit or neutral? I mean, that the people that didn't like it in front of the cemetery, they thought it was ugly. It's industrial. We heard it with the Loveland. It's industrial. It's a bunch of aluminum and shiny glass and so forth. So those trackers you'd put in that property, are they pro, con, or neutral scenically?
I think
Well,
I
and
think
then
I think
go ahead,
that
Ernie.
I think that's what that's the nub of it, because in actual fact they're kind of neutral until you get into the context of where they're going, and that's where the rules come in. That's why
Right.
it's smart to make up some rules.
So so here's another kind of question, interesting question. If the house fit the criteria of not violating the ridgeline protection, then how would you then be able to say 3 trackers does? And is that only because of what you were saying, because they have to clear more trees? Or because to me it's kind of like trackers, 3 trackers still falls under the sort of the term development, so to speak. Go ahead, Ernie.
Trackers, I was going to say, excuse me, you want to go, John?
Go.
The concept of trackers is when you have the opportunity to put it on a roof, that's the most practical place. But there's a number of reasons why you can't put it on your roof. You may have an old house that can't support the I don't know how heavy they are, but I mean, to me that's kind of a minimal argument, but nonetheless, the house may be in a place where either you don't want to or you can't. Let's say it's relatively close to a ridge line, you can't cut any trees down, and you're not gonna have, so you have to, the trackers, or even a ground mount, you have to put them someplace. You put them somewhere where they'll actually catch the sun, and if they're on your own property, and if they're associated with you, and what makes them, in my mind, neutral at the very worst, is that if they're associated with your own house and your own property, and if they don't really encroach on somebody else's life, they'd end up being neutral. So I think you have a whole pile of sort of small considerations adding up to a big consideration when you start thinking about things like those solar installation for an individual house or individual house site. When you start thinking about the larger sorts of community solar and stuff like that, then you have a whole nother different, we've got a whole nother animal. And that's really what's going on up in Upper Loveland is that kind of arrangement. I've been puzzling for a little while now, where we're focusing on the heliostat things and all that sort of thing, trackers, which I sometimes wonder, as a mechanical engineer, I have to wonder why anyone would trust a machine to last 20 years out in the weather.
But
Yeah.
Don't tell me that.
Right. I mean, I think
Sorry, gang. Sorry.
The
I
point-
considered solar for my place, and the last thing I was ever going to do was put a piece of moving equipment out on my property. It was going to be land. It was going to be a solid installation, because anything else it's going to be solid state. I don't trust. I'm a mechanical designer. I know when things fail. Last thing I'm doing is putting the thing out for 20 years or more. And trust it.
I paid the premium because I think it looks so cool.
They do. I will admit,
tracks
will
like a sunflower.
cool and,
But,
and stuff. I will admit that. Nonetheless,
But I do, to Ernie, to your point, that it's, it's neutral because it's on my property and it's kind of quote unquote not hurting anyone. That's kind of the crux of the scenic criteria, in the
it's not
sense
just for scenic. It's also
It's-
there's other examples too. I mean, like I said, forest block. Are you putting it? I mean, to access it, if you put it on a steep slope, that may have some effect on other issues. You have a steep slope, all of a sudden, you might have some kind of drainage issues. Out in my part of the town, it's possible
Yeah.
that kind of thing could cause a catastrophe on Target Town Road.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that one thing we absolutely need to do is to update the definition of development to include solar.
Yes,
As yes, we have a thing for windmills because that's what was of concern 15 years ago. But development, I mean, we had the question in Upper Loveland, just simply, did cutting the trees on the steep slope count as development? Is cutting a tree development? And if you look at our definition of development, it is, or land use even, it doesn't specify. But clearly, is putting a solar panel, a ground mount thing, is that development? And then is it a square footage thing or whatever? We have to answer that question. The DRB is going to get the exact same application they just got with some solar panels on it, and they're going to need our help to know what to do.
Well, is
it's
the
kind of
DRB then? Yeah, I would just from the perspective of the DRB that has to approve all these, I mean, are we going to have an application for every solar tracker ground mounted installation in town?
I'm not even sure we're allowed to, and that's one of
I don't think we. Yeah,
That's
I
one of
think it
the
would be
state
definitely-
questions.
The other thing that I was going to mention is that it's just to bring this back to the ridgeline consideration that we're sort of focused on. I think that the forest cover criteria, if you read it in the regs, it's very detailed. It calls for forest management plan if the DRB necessitates it. I think that would play a lot into any sort of solar development. I mean, if you're cutting trees on a ridge line, you have a lot of trouble with that criteria, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say when we start doing our regulations, we may be put into a position where we have to say things like, and I think this would probably be something we consider, because I've been thinking about it, is we're going to have to say houses for starters. Every house, when a house is permits applied for, they have to consider the solar orientation of the house. That the house has to, we have to put a sort of, if they are capable of having a solar orientation, they have to use it type of permit. So that then the next step is, if they choose to do solar, the house, they can put the panels on the house. Now, of course, some of this, there's a give and take as far as that's concerned because of the strength of the roof, design of the house and all those kinds of things. But the houses should be encouraged to put them on the house first. Then we move to the next step. You can't do that because the house is in one place and the sun's in another, and there was no way of doing solar orientation. Well, then you might have to put a tracker or a stand up stationary unit somewhere that's not on the house. But again, it's still associated with the building. Maybe you got to tell them it's got to be, that it shouldn't be outside of some sort of a diameter or some sort of an envelope beyond which it starts to become a sort of a public problem, because it starts becoming associated just with a thing plopped in the middle of the land. Things like that.
Good one.
What'd you say?
No, that's good. I just when you said in the development envelope, that's provided that might be what you're talking about, Alex, is that it's one thing to have the house in the development envelope, and then suddenly somebody puts a tracker out and they don't want it in their own backyard, so they suddenly cut down 3 more acres of forest. But I would assume that you would go through that review. That's an interesting question.
Yeah, it is a good point, or it's a good topic like you can put a sign on your own property, but you can't put a sign on someone else's property for your business, that kind of thing. Or even just, is it for your property? Like the state definitely mentions it's different if you're going to use all the power from the solar yourself. Like Hennessy's got a big enough complex up there that they're going to use 50 kW worth of solar electricity. So they put in the application, we're using it all on site. And that changes the way the net metering regs work. So there are these various subtleties that dictate more or less what you have to worry about. I do think that, the forest one is an important one. And I think it's useful to say, okay, here's some discussion points and some things we want to learn about in the 15 kilowatt and below range, and just put out the cemetery, the Meeting House Hill Cemetery one, and another, let's say, okay, let's think about that. Then there's the 50 to 150 kW kind of a project, and then there's kind of the upper level and up to 500 kind of and we need to look at each of those independently and say, okay, how do we think about that? Because clearly the preferred siting mapping kind of exercise is dominates the bigger ones, and the smaller ones are trickier and way more public, like private property, don't tell me what to do sort of thing. But it would really help me to have some examples, and then to know what we can do and what we can't do based on state stuff.
And you just brought up a really important thing to every kind of regulation that we are going to deal with, which is that's a taking of my land. You've taken my land.
Yeah.
And that's the town has I call it the black box. It's the density calculation we use. And I've always thought that was an utterly brilliant way of avoiding the takings issue, because basically the things that are permitted are not permitted, whichever way it goes, are based on something that a person who buys land should know before they even buy the land, and should know it, so that no one can say you just took away my rights.
Excellent point.
It's the way the land works. What's that?
Excellent point, because that's what Bob Gear was trying to allude to when he was saying, and you kind of agreed with him, that the economic, when you start taking away somebody's ability to
Do what they want.
I'm talking about only solar in this particular case. So Bob's point was somebody wants to make money by putting up a large community park, right? And Bob was saying, yeah, but you've taken away their ability to make money off their land. And Ernie just nailed it, that there are rules that enforce that, if you like, especially with the DRB, a lot of this has to do with new construction. Not necessarily there's new construction and that can and cannot go on a ridge line. And then there's older construction where somebody's already on the ridge line. Like from our road, I can look up at Bradley Hill. And somebody has, I know it was permitted. I don't know if it was Phil or who did it. I have no idea how that house got a permit for it. It is visible from every place below the house, except from Bradley Hill. Now, if they suddenly decided to clear an extra 5 acres and put, and here's a great exercise. They're already in the ridge line. And if suddenly they say, like the Hennessy's, are, because Hennessy wasn't in the ridge line, right? And that was the point. Okay. So if these guys I know are in the ridge line, Bradley Hill is, I believe, a big green blob in the ridge line. So now they've decided that they're going to do, and here's sort of our, A, B, and C. It's under 15 kilowatt. It's between 15 and 50 and above, which, falls into the preferred site. They go 248, have to come through us, or below 15. Are you suggesting that now they have to go through the DRB? So the criteria, here's a different way of looking at it. DRB is going to look at, if it's considered, this is where I think your original point would be important. This is not new construction. An existing house in the ridge line now suddenly wants to put up 5 trackers. It stayed under the 15 kilowatt, but they're in the ridge line. And to my knowledge, because it's not in the regs, would they have to get a permit to do that? And then we know they're in the ridge line. And if they're going to cut down those trees, that's where we're missing it. If it's a new construction, then the whole thing becomes its own little thing. So it's almost like there are multiple little ways of looking at it. Existing buildings, existing houses in the ridge line, new construction going into ridge line, and then depending on the size of the generation that they're proposing.
Yeah, it's like it's a version of overlays, but a little different. It's like you have this matrix. Is it in a scenic area? Are you cutting trees down or not? How big a system is it? And you get all those, you sort of have a secret decoder ring, and you say, okay, this is what it applies. These are rules that apply to you because you have these 5 criteria. I mean, just look at it. Look at another example. Say, Emily Myers, the Van Arment farm wants to. They're not clearing any trees. It's already open, but they want to put 5 trackers smack dip. Clearly scenic, but there's no definition that says PV's ugly. So not necessarily. Or in the orchard coming into town. Plop as many as you want in there as long as it passes the state regs. So it's useful to probe this with examples and see what kind of throw a lot of things at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, the Velcro wall. I like that. But go back to where we have, and it might be Kyle who might be a really good person to talk to, where we can actually make those kind of. Jay Van Armen would be a great example. Jay has decided to put 3 trackers right coming down, and I'd be so upset if he put 3 trackers there. I'll have to talk to him myself. But right in front of that beautiful view, because that is like one of the most photographed. And I wanted to sit there and paint, except, tough to put an easel on a big downslope.
Well, and they have
So-
probably 30 kilowatts of power because they can put more than 15 because it's a
Because they've got it
farm.
on the,
They've
he's
got
got
it
it
on the
barn.
barn. It's on the barn.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Can I ask a stupid question first before you go on? Because I'm
Yeah,
just
there are no
curious.
stupid questions, Ernie. Go ahead.
Why we keep on talking about trackers, and it is a certain size, I guess, which is a certain size component. But the point is that you can have stationary small installations as well too, and so on and so forth. So I'm just curious, how did we get here on a tracker as opposed to?
It's just we should just call it ground. We should just call it ground
Ground
mount.
mount.
Well,
Ground
ground mount.
That's the term.
All right.
It's,
Ground
the ground
mount.
mount
So
is
it's not-
different than roof mount.
So if Jay decides to put three trackers, or I'm sorry, 3 ground mounts in front of that view, as much as he'd break the hearts, he has the right to do it. So again, it goes back to what we were just saying. If it falls below a certain criteria, like, below the 15, I'll have to look again. I'll have to look back at the preferred site. I wish I had it in front of me so we would know. If it's under the kilowatt and Jay's property is in the scenic thing, then it should trigger a DRB meeting, an application. If you are in it, because it is considered development, and that's what you were asking originally. Does putting up a tracker, is it considered development as opposed to, and I'm not talking about just one ground mount, I'm talking about maybe multiples or something. And that's where we've really got to get our homework done, because we need to know where one ground mount isn't in the purview of anybody in town, but 3 might. So if his field is in the Ridgeline district, does it, and can we actually say it triggers a DRB? Now, of course, if it's over 50, it triggers a 248 and it comes before all of us. Or no, well, it comes before the select board and the planning commission. So
I'd
now
like
I
to
forgot what my point is with Jay, is there something that, and I know what I was going to say, going back to, if it comes to us as a preferred site, what, you go through the Queechy tests and the undue adverse impact, and what they're trying to do is say, well, Jay, if you want to put a solar park, we're hoping that you'll put the solar panels, around the edge of the field rather than just take the field over. So they're starting to say, are there mitigating steps that you can apply to this, your solar application? And that goes back to Ernie's point of saying, can a planning commission or, can the town say, use the word encourage, if possible, to put it on your roof? Is a big difference between shall, must, and encourage in these things. And that's where I think that we need to find out if under, where does the town have, like, stay off of this, subject, because we don't have the ability to actually create this kind of legislation, so to speak. Ernie.
Well, I was going to say, first of all, just a little bit of a correction. When I use the word encourage, you don't use that in a regulation. That's simply in sort of a preamble, or when you're trying to explain a purpose. You in the regulation itself, you either use mandatory. You should use mandatory statements, and if you need to, permissive, like the word may instead of shall, or the word is must. You don't use shall anymore. You use must or may, and so on. So the word encourage is in the aspirational, prelude to the the thing. But it's another thing I was thinking of though, when it comes to how we sort of think of where people could put things, and and things like that, is especially think about in the case of a farm. Now, if sticking with I
Jay,
hate when I lose
Jay,
the farms we were just talking about.
Jay's.
Jay's farm.
His daughter now.
Jay, if some of it we might be horrified. Someone might think it's terrible, if he puts any kind of a small for himself solar installation somewhere scenic. But what would happen if, what he did is, instead of doing that, how would we feel if he just sort of leveled out an area and decided to park his tractors there? I mean, there's nothing saying he can't do that. He's not building a building. He's not doing anything that would require any kind of a permit. And he's putting a bunch of machinery. Some people might think, hey, tractors are cool. Other people will say, that's hideous. So we have to think about, so we should be, in a way, we have to think about solar installations kind of like that, like they're machinery, because they are. Now, and just, how, in what way are we going to incrementalize the requirements so that, we get what we want, under one set of circumstances, we get what we want in another set of circumstances, and yet at the same time, we don't take away rights that at some point somebody will fight us over.
Yeah.
I mean, the property rights issues in this country dominate every other right except for gun rights. So, it's only a matter of time that we'll fall into a property rights trap. We're very lucky, and I think that black box density calculation is a very major reason why we haven't fallen into it so far for the past. Well, I got on the DRB in 2003, so when it just first started.
So you have something like cutting trees down that becomes almost easier to talk about or easy to agree on. The subjective judgment, I think I like the sort of machinery parking lot kind of, and because it really does get at how subjective is scenic.
Right.
One person's scenic is another person's eyesore.
I do have a soft spot for tractors too, by the way.
And so some people love tractors. So you really have to figure out a way to carve through that and say, all right, it doesn't have a practical, it's not causing erosion because you cut all the trees down, or whatever that you can really look at from a objective point of view. If it's subjectively, we don't like the way this looks, you got to be really careful. But we clearly do it. I mean, we put a huge amount of work into that scenic inventory, and it's referenced in the regs. So it's not like you can't take it into account. It's in the town plan that ridgelines and scenic are part of preferred solar. So there is a line that can be carved there, but it's like, I think your point was right, Chris. The Koichi test and the mitigating, would a reasonable person be offended by it? I mean, those are the kinds of things they're asking to try and carve that middle ground. So you won't get enough agreement on one small ground mounted thing being an eyesore to get any agreement to regulate that. But if you say, no, we will agree that a big thing that cuts down lots of trees and fills the whole field, that's unacceptable. So somehow we're trying to find that middle. But I do think the simple question, what's the definition of development and what needs a permit? is an important linchpin here.
So the Creasy test is really only applicable for the larger ones. And the only reason I think I was kind of thinking we were directing ourselves to this topic right now is because the DRB isn't involved with anything that, from 150 up or whatever the stopgap is.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we can continue our conversation. I was just trying to see with Alex here that if there's anything that the DRB with the scenic resources and ridge lines with smaller ones, but I just want to make sure we're in a legal, safe zone that we can't suddenly jump down on somebody who wants, and not one ground mount. It would be, again, new construction, Meeting House Road, for example, in Ridgeline, or the place I'm talking about up at Bradley Hill. That would be a great one. Bradley Hill, smack dab. Oh, by the way, I have never figured out Becky Brown's. Ernie, you must have signed off on the preferred site letter with Becky Brown's parcel.
Where's that one?
Right on Union Village Road, and Union Village Road is one of the scenic roads. It's in the scenic map, and their trackers are visible from that road. And I was surprised that solar park got a preferred siting, because again, I think they said it's the #1 protected road in the town of Norwich.
I'm still not clear what solar you're talking about.
So Becky Brown's, when you coming down Union Village Road towards Union Village and Bradley Hill, right?
Yeah.
So Bradley Hill and Union Village, and then the Cooks have lived in that house, the Cape, with all the horses and such.
Yeah.
Becky's one of the Cooks, and she lives in the next house back there.
Yeah.
And then their field has for years been open, and they don't have cows anymore, so the trees are starting to come up.
Yeah.
The park is literally because they're letting the pine trees grow, which I don't think it will last long, because they're gonna start affecting the solar, and they're gonna end up having to cut some of those down.
I can see that from Maple Hill. So when we walk Maple Hill Road, you look up to that first hill of Bradley Hill, and it's big PV. Yes.
Yeah, and I don't know if that particular parcel is in the ridgeline protection, because again, I can't tell by that map without having roads and having something that gives you contours and parcels. That's the other thing about the E9. Yeah, I meant to say this to you. The E911 map not only gives you the contours and the names of the roads, but you can actually do parcel mapping. So you would actually be able to see whose parcel is in the ridge line, which I think is going to be actually a really relevant thing, not just the road, but the parcel. And I was not involved, but I was thinking, wow, the solar parks going in there, that would have been a bone of contention for being along one of the scenic resource, Union Village Road. But it went up, and I can see it every time I drive by. I see it.
Yeah. No, I see it every day too. And I wonder on that, but it is, that would be, at least now, and I don't know about the town plan that was previously, pre-2000 town plan. What did it say about preferred? That was put in pre-2000. What were the?
No, Becky's only went up. Oh, good heavens! That only went up in like 6 years ago.
Right, but the town plan.
That was a Norwich technology.
But the town plan that has default preferred solar everywhere was after that.
Interesting point, Jan. As a matter of fact, that would have come out pre-2017. No, because I remember that they were going to do a preferred site letter, that it was under the whole preferred site letter thing. So anyway, I'm not sure. Anyway, I never looked into whether it was in the ridgeline protection area. I wasn't
Yeah,
part of the
I mean,
PC or the select board at the time, so, whatever.
it gets to the same, we talked about it with Upper Loveland, and part of the impetus for this subcommittee was to do a postmortem or a lessons learned on Upper Loveland. And so what we're talking about here is expanding that. Let's do a lessons learned that is Upper Loveland, the Bradley Hill Solar Project, the single tracker in front of the Meeting House Cemetery. There are 4 or 5 examples, and that's what you want to ask the town. What did we learn from these? Did we learn, fine, let anybody do what they want, we want it? Or did we learn, oh, that one's okay, but that one, we got to do something about? I mean, I just think we increase the number of examples, and we could help the conversation.
I think that I think Upper Loveland, I don't think Bradley Hill was controversial. I think most of the neighbors were supportive of it. I don't think anybody who was driving down Union Village Road was consulted, nor are they at the time. I mean, you'd have to lobby the select board or the planning commission if you oppose it, and then if they just still sign off on the preferred site letter, then you go, you start, bugging the PUC during the 248 review. So you always have that appeal process to go there, which is what the Upper Loveland people did. They basically said, whoa, back the train up. You guys just handed them the preferred site letter, but it's in scenic, it's in the ridgeline protection. So why didn't it even make it to 248 with a preferred site letter? And the preferred site letter, by the way, I think there's a huge misunderstanding that if the town doesn't sign off on a preferred site letter, it doesn't mean they can't go before 248. I mean, the preferred site letter just gives them that it gives a solar company monetary
it's pennies per kilowatt hour.
They get a financial benefit from a preferred site letter, which, again, I've always had a qualm with that. That with a town that has just given us a blanket preferred site letter, when there's a financial incentive, I think that's a interesting combination. But it doesn't preclude someone from saying, if the town doesn't give them a preferred site letter, they can go before the PUC and say, we want to do this. So
Chris,
back to Alex,
what do you picture as a sort of a, I'm looking at the time and I'm trying to bundle this. What do you picture? What's a good step forward? What's the next step?
So I just want to, I think it was great having Alex here, because it will make us have to, look at the definition, the PUC definition of preferred site, so we'll know, and then get some help from Kyle if we can even do anything under some of our examples. Again, the Bradley Hill is a good example. Somebody's in the ridgeline protection, the house is already built, and they want to clear 3 acres to put 3 trackers or find out where's the separation between when it goes before the if and when it would go before the DRB, and then we already know what happens, and we can continue the conversation of what happens when it goes before the planning commission and the select board. I mean, that goes into the big ones that we go through that route. But if there's anything that, Alex, what we've been trying to say is if somebody wants to clear and put a certain, are we having this conversation and we shouldn't even have bothered, because which I disagree, because if development is if PV falls under development, and somebody's in the ridge line, either under new construction or old construction, and they are in the ridge line, and somebody now says, I want to put up 3 trackers, that is development, they would pull a permit and it would go before the DRB. So at that point, you would say, okay, now where is that criteria? What do you start looking at?
Right. So it
And then-
sounds like what you're saying, which I think is a good idea, is we need to benchmark current status, current regulations. So that's the part of it's the state boundaries of what we can and can't do. And then it's Kyle helping us interpret current regulations and definitions to say what would trip what. And then we'll have 2 things. We'll either have ambiguity in those that would help to clean up, or we'll have new situation, something that we want to change just because it's not right. We think the town wants to do it differently, and that may be like the difference between windmills and PVs from 2009 to 2023, or we just look at the current state of what regs, how we're guiding things now, and we say, oh, that's not what the town wants. We talk to the town, and the town says, oh, wait a minute, that's not what we want. I didn't realize you could do that. But you're right. The first thing to do is to say, where do we stand now?
Well, no, because you guys introduced the idea of having a paragraph embodied in the regs that would actually define PV as opposed to just development. If that's if that was sort of where we started this, I think where we sort of bounced off in this conversation is, does there need, I guess the big question is there a need to have a separate paragraph that identifies PV separate from development in itself? Or does the DRB, are you guys satisfied that if somebody wants to build 3 tracker or 3 ground mounts, then they're gonna be looking at the same criteria, and we don't really need to do this? Go ahead, Ernie.
I think that it is for the use with the DRB, the more granularity we give our definitions, the more we break things down and get very specific, the easier it is for the development review board to make its decisions, as long as we don't have conflicts between each of the various separate pieces. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yep.
And so I think that's one thing. So I think, in answer to your or I think I agree with you, actually, we should define we can define PV as development, but we should define it as a specific kind of development, so that it's so that where simply being development matters, DRB has that set of regulations, but where it matters that it's a bit of a different kind of development, because we do make distinctions between different kinds of developments, and we make different distinctions because of if it's affordable housing, we make it if it's multiple, if it's a condominium, all different kinds of things do we make exception, do we treat differently. So even though it's considered a development, it's a specific kind of development, and there are certain rules that go along with it too. So we're both defining it as development, but we are also defining it as a specific kind of development, which is to say PV. Do you understand? Or
Yeah.
I like that, and I like the comparison to affordable housing. What's the same and what's different about PV compared to a house, a barn, an affordable house, and just lay that out and say it is it's the same this way, and it can follow the common development guidelines, and it's different this way. And so it either like the default solar essentially says PV is different, it's special and gets a buy. And a lot of the state regs are doing that, are saying PV, renewable energy projects, are good, and therefore they're special, and we will help them along.
But
So
some,
it's the same issue. It's different in a way that gives it assistance, or it's different and it needs special treatment of a separate way.
there are the special things that need treatments too, and are right now not fashionable, such as, you know, we should be for making sure that farmland doesn't get wasted. You know, I mean, again, it's not just because it's pretty or anything like that, or that, you know, it's got so many benefits to the community it's in. You know, including it to some degree it diminishes a certain amount of you know, if people are both buying locally, you know, there's less fuel used to transport food, and therefore less emissions, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
You know, all kinds of, there are all kinds of considerations for lots of different stuff that, you know, right now solar is a favorite of and it's a justifiable favorite, I mean, I'll say, but it's a favorite of a certain group of people that have a lot of influence in the state. But there are other things that are important that they're kind of forgetting about now, and to some degree even sacrificing to solar. Not a brilliant move in the long run. Might serve in the short run, but it's not very good in the long run. So you have to think about that kind of stuff too. And are we going to just, we have to be careful. Are we going to just sort of, you know, sniff tails and do what other people are doing, or are we going to also sort of like break some ground here too?
So wait a minute, Ernie, I just want to make sure we're still focusing. We're trying to get a to-do list going, and so, you know, I know getting rid of farmland. I'm still trying to keep us on task with Kyle here.
That is partly it. That is partly it, because when it comes to solar, where is most of it going to end up?
Well,
yeah,
and
no,
the point is too, if you lean towards farmland conflict with the proposed new state regs that say you can't cut more than 3 acres of forest,
right,
then you basically shove solar towards open land, and then that conflict becomes more intense.
No, but that's we're before we get into big solar park, that preferred site stuff. I'm trying to keep us with helping the DRB right now. But that goes back to the Creechy test and mitigating circumstances. So we will have, we'll get into that later, but as far as the DRB and seeing if it's even in our purview to question anything that's small, but it's in the ridgeline protection area. And so so my question to you, Jan, is that you're the one that's sort of been, I don't mean to task you with this, but you've sort of been the our link with Peter Gregory.
Yeah.
I kind of think this is Peter Gregory territory for him, to start asking him, you know.
It's between Peter and Kyle, you could get some questions answered quickly. I agree. And that, because they may say, you can't sub 15 kilowatts, you can't touch it. Don't
touch.
And we say, okay, fine, that's life. But yeah, we can get that question answered.
But at the same time, the question about what Ernie's saying and what we have been talking about is, should we somewhere in the regs define solar in its own, should it have what just saying, definition? Under definitions, it seems to me that would be a great Peter Gregory question. If in the regs, that maybe not a paragraph, but in the definitions, that it will explain what is, you know, PV development, and that might satisfy, you know, the DRB with some of their questions. The other thing that I wanted to do as a to-do list, and I don't know, ask them, it would be, I'll tell you, I'd go after it, but I'm sure Peter Gregory will help you. I really want to get that map, the ridgeline protection map, with parcels and street numbers. I mean, the topo would be kind of nice. I'm sure the DRB might appreciate slopes or topos, but it seems to me that somebody should be able to print a map for us, a pretty good sized map, and then we can use that for all kinds of things. Parcels, street numbers, street names. If the DRB is helpful for you guys to see some of the slopes, some of the contours, you
Yeah.
can do a lot of that kind of stuff. But somehow if I don't want to keep talking about these darn maps. I want to get one done. So you can
Yeah.
task me on it, but
Well,
it may cost us money to
I
have somebody
think
do that.
what I would propose, and then I do think I want to close it up so we don't lose our
Yeah.
time, our being famous for ending on time reputation. But I do think that I think we should leap forward on the map question to say, and go straight to the select board. I'll go to Peter Gregory and he'll go to, it's Keith or Kevin or somebody at the regional commission who's the map whiz, and say, we want to put these maps in GIS format, and it's $15,000 or whatever it is. And the select board's gonna have to fund it because they can't find the old versions, and we leapfrog to something useful. And then contours and wetlands and parcel maps, that's all in GIS already.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I can't
All
imagine.
you have to do is take the definition of ridgeline, the 750 from those things, and put that in GIS, and then boom, you can make whatever overlays you want and print them and save them and so forth. So, I think we should just, I will take that action to propose a practical working map plan, method thing, move forward.
Quick question is that 750 feet, is that, by the way, from the center line, or is that the total width?
I'm not sure which, but I know it's literally where you put there's a mapping function in GIS. There's one in SketchUp that's just go that distance away from this line I just created.
And is that established by state statute or by our own? Because I can't remember where.
I think it's us. It's in the regs.
It's in the regs.
So we can change
the regs.
too. We can,
Yes.
we're going. Like I said, it's going to be changing because of the forest blocks, which will collide anyways. So
The PUC, I don't know when the PUC is going to make a ruling. That's going to just have such an impact if they do go ahead with that.
The
So, I looked-
the 5/100 that'll go to 3 acres or whatever.
Yeah, I've looked and there is no new briefs, so I don't know if they had
anything. Yeah, I haven't gotten anything in ages.
All right, so
You'll
very quickly,
see a bunch of to-dos on the minutes, and I think that can help us with next steps.
well, Jan, I feel bad because we just put you on all the to-do lists.
No, I'm gonna write up the minutes, and there will be more than there'll be more of them than have my name on them. I
I know,
promise.
Amy, he's gonna be too busy. She's listening to us give you all these things. I'll do the maps.
The maps
so I
overlaps with the planning commission, and I want to get us over that hurdle into something useful, and I'm perfectly willing to make the select board cough up some money and get it done, then keep arguing about it.
right,
But I think I would ask, one of the things that'll be on the list, Chris, that if you could take on would be the this question of going back into the state regs and bracketing 15 to 50, 50 to 150, 150 to 500, and what are the state boundaries on what the towns can do, and just get that table in an easy, so that we can all look at it and go, oh, okay, that's what the state tells us we can do.
So that's basically the PUC definition. Okay, I'll get that. We've been handed that. We handed that out our first planning commission meeting. I think Linda Gray submitted it, or somebody submitted it.
It's in the existing version of 5/100 of 5/100. It has the existing. It's in the beginning.
I think I'm sorry, your name isn't up.
Kathleen.
She has Kathleen.
Hi, I wanted to thank you for this learning session and for your persistence in trying to find out the facts, and with the high hope that one of the soon results will be that people can understand what they're able to do. But I have to see. Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah, yeah,
Good night. Good night.
yeah. And I think that'll be a to-do that we all need to, that'll be like next meeting to do, which will be around how do you play with definitions of development, and should you take a PV thing and put it into a 4.16 or some other way. But I think we need to know what we can and can't do. There's no point in working on that if the state tells us we're not allowed to touch X, Y, and Z or whatever. So let's figure out the boundaries.
Okay, so you've got some homework. Sorry, Amy. And I'm going to get the definition of preferred sites, and which, again, we've been handing that out. And then we quickly have to go through the minutes. I think we should just, I have there were two minutes that we had to look at. Or, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump.
You don't have them
to-
on the agenda. You don't have them on the agenda, so you can't approve them anyway.
Yeah, we did.
Where?
On the bottom. Pam added them.
Oh, I must be looking at a newer version or the older version of the agenda. Okay.
Would you
So,
all
Alex,
mind
I'm
if
sorry.
I,
We're just
if
doing
I hopped off?
No, I was going to say.
Thanks
we're
for
just gonna
including the
do
DRB in the meeting, guys. I think
bet.
this is helpful. All right, take care, everyone.
Thanks.
So sorry, yeah, I
Okay.
didn't have them. I'm looking at an old agenda.
Yep. So she added, and God, it takes so long for my computer to. She said approve minutes of August 24 and September 19th. I have no issues with either one.
All right, I would move to approve those two sets of minutes.
Second.
All right.
All in favor, say aye.
Hey, okay. And then
What do we do with approved minutes now?
Pam
I've
knows
never
what
got to this point.
Pam knows what to do
Okay,
with
so-
approved minutes. They take the place of draft minutes wherever draft minutes are.
Right. So she'll do that. So you write it in you're writing it in these
Right.
minutes. and
In the
those-
minutes, it will say they're approved, and then Pam takes that as to be remove the draft off of them.
Okay. So I have a task. Ernie, don't you want something to do?
Just wait for the minutes, and then you can volunteer for something, because
Yeah, right, exactly.
there will be
Because
opportunity.
because I certainly don't have enough to do, as you well know, Chris.
There will be opportunity, and I think the point is just to put this stuff in order. And we're not going to do it all in a month, but let's just put it in order. Obviously, we need to know what the state will let us do before we try to do it. So let's just put things in the right order and then take them as fast as we can do them. And
Okay.
that's the best we can do.
And a map. I want that map.
I love maps, so I'm not arguing with that.
And I found that report that I was talking about earlier.
Okay, so yeah, if you just send that to me, I'm gonna set up so that Pam will be able to take whatever's already a public document, whatever has gone through a committee or is in their files already. We don't have to go through packets or anything. We just pull it out and put it in a place that's easier to find.
Chris, do you want a copy of it too?
Yeah.
Since you're here.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna
I
motion.
mean, I don't know if you were going to put it I don't know if it's worth putting in a packet, but anyway. All right.
We don't need to put it in the packet if we have another
I don't
place
think we
to
need to
put
put
it.
it in
You
the
just
packet.
put a link in the packet if you want to. And then
Yeah.
we'd have a place for it.
But I think if we're going to show it to the rest of the committee, you'd be the person who'd have to decide whether it should be shown to them or not. And I don't think it needs to be shown. I think it just we have to have a record of it.
Well, and same thing with the PC. I mean, I would love to get to the point where we can point people. You can put two sentences in. This is that report that we paid for that recommended changes to the regs, and here's the link. And if people want to go look at it, they go look at it, and then they look at it and say that was really interesting, and they tell their friend to go look at it. But we just it
They'll
doesn't
think
need
it's
to
really,
be 20 pages.
really scary.
All right, I'm gonna move to adjourn.
No, wait, just,
Okay.
yeah. Should we, is there anything that we want, we're just gonna recap next week, right? For if I put it on an agenda?
Oh,
Just a
yeah.
kind of a recap, just stick, let's just stick for a while to the scenic resources and what we've come up with.
I think so. I think we can step through. We got another couple meetings worth of fodder on that topic for sure.
Yeah, okay. So
And
we'll
then
stick with that.
and then it'll come out that we're talking about, Jay Van Arman putting solar ground on it. And boom, we'll get 15 people to come to the meeting. So, it's a pithy topic.
Funny.
All right.
All right, meeting, calling I second that.
Second. All right.
I
All in
seconded it.
favor?
It's been second. It's been thirded and there are only 3. So good night all.
See you later.
Good night. Good
Night.
night.